Welcome to the She's Bold podcast. I'm Beth Whitman. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining me for another episode of the She's Bold podcast. Today's guest is Stasia Honnold. Stasia is an adventurer, but not just any kind of adventurer. She's a human-powered adventurer. So what does that mean? In short, she bikes, she hikes, and she runs. And rarely does she use a car to do any of those. She doesn't own a car. She only ever has to borrow one if she's going to participate in the car community. She's a woman who makes up her own adventures and figures out how to execute on them with lots of planning and organizing. As Stasia says, she lives by a set of values and makes her life choices based on these values, doing no harm. And in doing so, she's living simply as well as on her own terms. It was my intention to highlight Stasia for just being Stasia, and not mentioning her family ties because she really does deserve recognition in her own right for what she does, because she does some pretty cool stuff. But talk about her family came out naturally during our conversation. And what I'm talking about is the fact that her brother is Alex Honnold, who free soloed up El Capitan and whom you can learn all about in the Academy Award-winning movie Free Solo. Her mom, by the way, is Deirdre Walnick, and I've had Deirdre on the podcast a couple of times. That was episodes number 127 and 83. So you can go back and listen to those to get a fuller picture of the family. Stasia writes about her adventures on her blog, carfreerambles.org, and I encourage you to read her beautiful writing there. Just a reminder to please take a moment to leave a review or rating on iTunes or whatever podcast app it is you're using to listen. And please share this episode with a couple of friends. All of those things help the podcast get more exposure and help more people find it. Oh, and before I do get to our conversation, I want to mention that we recorded this about a month ago. We talk about Portland and the protests there, but it was long before a protester was killed this past week. So that's why we don't mention anything about that. With that, please enjoy this conversation with Stasia Honnold. Stasia, thanks for being here today. We've been trying to get this together. It's probably, has it been 2 years? It's been at least a year.
It's been a long time.
It has. I know. We've done so much back and forth by email. I feel like I do know you. You know, here we are. You're down in Portland. Hey, what's happening down in Portland these days? Are there still protests going on? Like, are you in an area where you kind of know what's happening, or is it just so far removed even from you, even though you're in the city, that you don't really know what's going on?
I'm physically removed from it. Just our house is not super close to where most protests happen. However, my partner is really involved in local politics, so I hear about it a lot, and we've been downtown several times. So it's kind of one of those, like, if I wanted to ignore it, I could, and that is privilege, and I don't want to ignore it. So, yeah, I don't know. I think for a lot of people in Portland, it's probably life as normal. Didn't want to engage.
Yeah, it's funny. It was coming up on my news feed quite a bit, especially with the federal agents going in, and I just haven't seen anything about it recently. And I just realized this morning as I was thinking about talking to you in Portland, I was like, oh yeah, what's going on there? I haven't seen much going on.
I don't know. I mean, like, the fence and stuff is still down there, and people are still protesting every night. I mean, it's bigger than just feds. It is like a Black Lives Matter and social equity protest as well. So it's not like the feds leaving means everything's done.
Good. Well, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, for sure. I never expected that it would. And I you know what, honestly, I haven't even seen what's happening in Seattle recently either.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that there's people still out protesting. There's a group of people who are showing up at night to city council members' homes. So they come out at 10, 11 o'clock at night and they march to city council members' homes and kind of have them come out and talk to them, which I think is great. And it is about the social inequities and police funding and that sort of thing. So it is still going on for sure. So anyway, hey, what do you do for work down there? I don't even know specifically what you do.
I work for a Washington nonprofit called Washington Trails Association, which maybe you've heard of.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're the biggest statewide nonprofit. So I'm the Southwest Regional Coordinator for Washington Trails Association. So when we had an office our office is in Vancouver.
Vancouver, Washington.
Yes, Vancouver, Washington.
Just for people who don't
Canada.
know, yeah. Uh-huh.
The little itty-bitty Vancouver. So yeah, I coordinate trail work parties and lead trail work parties and steward public land. Pretty great.
Yeah, how long have you worked for them?
I think this is my 3rd year now. Not super long yet.
On a normal day, are you in an office or are you outside?
Kind of half and half. So the coordinating part of it is office-based, where I'll be talking to like our people, my contacts from the Forest Service or from state parks, and kind of coordinating what work needs to happen on the trails that they have, that they steward. And that's office-based, but then field-based would be going out and actually leading a group of volunteers to do trail work, or going out and looking at a trail, or like scoping out what needs to happen, or laying out a new trail. We've been helping the Yakima Nation out on the east side of Mount Adams lay out a trail that was lost in their fire. Some of that, like laying out new trails, all sorts of cool stuff.
Yeah, that is cool. When you go out in the field, like you mentioned that you lead a group of volunteers, but are there times when you're out there by yourself?
Yeah, certainly. I do a lot of scouting trails by myself, which would be going out and seeing like what sort of condition the trail's in and if it needs work and what kind of work, or sometimes going out and trying to figure out where to put a new trail. That is often done by myself. Sometimes it's done with my boss, but now we can't carpool anymore. So definitely now it's me or him.
That must not even feel like work.
No, it's great. I love it.
That's why I asked. Like, I'm thinking, oh yeah, if I could go out by myself and I'm going to use air quotes and like go work on a trail, it just wouldn't feel like work. But I understand. I know you're working hard, but that is so cool. And so you're the Southwest coordinator. Are there others in your office down there who are doing similar work, or are you the only one?
There's 2 of us year round. So there's me and then there's my supervisor who does a lot more on the advocacy side of trails. So trying to make sure that they're funded and that we're building trails that are accessible to everybody, and all sorts of cool stuff that he does. And typically in the summer, we'd hire a crew leader who would help us with capacity for doing trail work, since we can do the most in the summer. But this year with COVID, we didn't have enough funding to hire that position. So this year it's just the 2 of us. But typically it's like 2.5.
Yeah. Where does your funding come from?
Primarily through donors, like private donors, individuals and corporate donors. And then we get some grant money from, say, the Forest Service and other people that we work with.
So have you seen donations just fall off? Is that why you don't have as much funding?
Actually, a lot of the lack of funding is because some of the money we get from Forest Service for doing work, and we weren't able to do work at the beginning of COVID. We're now back doing work at a reduced rate. So some of it's that donations, actually, we were just talking about this in the last staff meeting. Donations are smaller, but there's more donors now, which is interesting. So like a lot of people, first time donation, I think just feeling like, what can I do that's productive? They're like, oh, I enjoy the trails and I believe in Washington Trails Association's mission of trails for everyone. So yeah, it's actually really kind of heartening.
So yeah, it seems like there's a lot more people who are out and about on the trails anyway, like people who had never hiked before are just like really wanting to get out. So they are out hiking, and I imagine they're so appreciative of being able to get out of their house that they are willing to donate for the first time, right? We've
been really big on this recreate responsibly thing, just trying to get the word out for people to how to get out on trails safely right now. And I think a lot of people have really appreciated that as well, that we're not like, don't use the trails, or like only some people can use the trails. It's like everyone needs access to the outdoors right now, and here's how we can all share it safely.
Next time you're up in the Seattle area to check out a trail, give me a call. I'll go out and work. I'll go out and work with you. I'll go hiking with you at 6 feet, 6 feet distance. Yes. But no, if that ever comes up, I'd be totally into that. It'd be fun.
Yeah,
we were just out at Mount Si a couple of days ago hiking, which was just fantastic because the weather was great.
Yeah.
So
it's funny because even though we're based in Seattle, I don't know most of the Seattle stuff since all my work is down here.
Oh, right.
Washington. So actually it'd be fun for me too. I could go explore the Seattle trails.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know them super well, but probably better than you, like you said. So yeah, if you ever do want to get out, I'd be happy to do that. It'd be a lot of fun. So has your work, other than not being completely funded and kind of working on a little bit reduced, has your work changed much since COVID?
Gosh, I don't even know how to answer that. It's changed in different ways. I was furloughed, for example, for basically all of April. So pretty early on, we had a bunch of furloughs just to kind of like save money while we didn't know what was happening. So in that sense, it definitely changed because I didn't work for all of April. But then since I've been back, it has been different. We worked really hard to get some really good COVID protocols in place so that we could go back out with volunteers. So like a trail work party looks a lot different now than it did before COVID, where people are 6 feet apart and we have masks and everything's sanitized and we don't share tools anymore and we don't give people refreshments at the end of the day like we used to. So that in that sense, like the volunteer experience of my work has changed as well, and the way I interact with volunteers a little bit. Yeah, and I don't go to an office anymore.
Do you like working from home?
You know, parts of it I do like. I do like that I've been running a lot more, I feel like, because I can run for a long time in the morning and then I don't have to commute. So I come home and I just go straight to work and I don't have to work in my commute time. Because otherwise my bike ride to work is like an hour and 15 minutes one way. So that's the downside, is I miss all of the biking that I usually do to get to work, to get to my office. So I don't know, depending on how I feel on any given day, better or worse.
But it's still full-time right now? You're full-time?
It's still full-time, yes. Yeah. I did work 3/4 time for a while too, but now I'm back to full-time.
And then just kind of one last question along this line of thinking. How did you respond to the epidemic, like in the beginning? How was your response in the beginning, and then how is it now? Like, did you totally buy into it and say, oh, okay, this is a new normal, I'm going to have to make some changes here? Or did you, like me, think, oh, this is going to blow by in a couple of weeks and everything's going to go back to normal?
You're talking about personally here, right? Not professionally?
Yes, yeah, personally. Well, and because like for you professionally, something changed pretty quickly. Like you were furloughed, so you didn't have work.
Yeah.
For me, I have my own business, so I didn't have an external thing that made me realize that there was a big change, because I was already working from home and going about my business. And, frankly, I can have as much or as little work as I want on a daily basis, because I kind of, it's like I'm just making it all up because it's my own business. But for people who rely on someone else to kind of make their hours, lay them off, put them on furlough, decide whether they're going to work or not, I realize that they just had a different experience, from the beginning than I did.
Yeah, it's funny to think back to it. I think initially I was very, like at the beginning, nobody really knew what was going on. And I think my partner and I were both like, okay, we have to be in this together. We have to both follow the same sort of safety guidelines, like we can't put each other at risk because we are a household, and we were very careful for a while about like going outside. I don't know. Now I feel like it's pretty normal to like go out and see people and wear a mask and hang out in the park or something. But I remember early on, even just biking around and feeling kind of guilty for being out on my bicycle. Like, can I be on my bike right now? I'm not sure. Is it safe? Like if I pass someone, are they going to get sick, And if for better or for worse, I feel less overtly like isolated like that now. Like I feel like it's okay for me to go bike somewhere and put my mask on. So I guess it's changed a little bit. I don't know. It's funny to try to characterize it.
And it's so different for everybody too. Like when it first happened, like you could look around my neighborhood and there would be like nobody outside. And I would be the same way. I'd go out for a run and I'd be like, where is everybody? Like I actually, this one time I was running on a street I normally am not on. And I ran into these two, like a mother-daughter, who were walking. And there were so few people on the street that I actually stopped them. And I said, are we allowed to be outside? Because there is nobody around.
Totally.
And they said, they're like, no, this is just like a sleepy neighborhood, and nobody's out. But I thought, did I miss an announcement from the mayor or the governor or something? So it was that same thing of like
other countries too were saying like, don't go outside. And
that's what I know. I was waiting for that. I was waiting for that to happen here. But that was that same kind of feeling of like, am I allowed to be out? So and also my thing was that I would go to the grocery store with my mask on and I would come back so angry because I'm like, I don't want this to be normal. And I would be like, I don't want to wear a mask, not for the reason that some of the other parts of the country are saying, but it's just like, I don't want this to be normal. I don't want to feel right about this, but I've calmed down and, it's like.
Actually, the first time I went to the farmer's market is like a very big staple for me. Like I volunteer there as much as I can and I go whenever I can. And I really believe in like farmers markets and buying directly from farmers. And the first time I went to the farmer's market, like the first time it was open after COVID, I went and everyone just like the whole atmosphere was like tense and stressed out. And like vendors were like, I don't want to touch your cash. And like nobody really knew what to do. And everyone was like so stressed out. And I came home and I cried because I was just like, the farmer's market is this like place of community and wonderfulness and like where I know people. And it felt so different. And I just came home and it's like, that was so sad. And then since then, like people have gotten used to it. And now it's, like we chat again and it's like, you can kind of like slow down and not just be on a mission to buy your produce really quickly. But that was a maybe striking moment for me of COVID.
Yeah, I remember early on, people were like, go into the grocery store, get what you need and leave, and sometimes and now I find myself like reading the back of a package and I'm like, I hope no one's going to be pissed at me for this, but
I'm still not sure if I can touch things and put them back, honestly.
Oh, I know. Careful choosing your avocado.
I was just talking about that with my friend. Yeah.
I know, it's crazy. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, good. It sounds like you're in a good place, at least right now. And I think we're all kind of getting used to it. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. Did you grow up in Sacramento?
Yes.
I know your mom's been there for ages. I've been to Sacramento. I've been to, I think, probably the house that you grew up in. I went to your mom's to record. It's not, I don't know Sacramento well at all. I think I've been through there just a couple of times, but it's not the most outdoorsy of places, right? It's a city. Where did you...
A suburb. I would call it a suburb.
Yeah, it's a suburb. Yeah, okay, it's a suburb. Where did you get your love for the outdoors?
Gosh, I don't know. I mean, we always went camping and were outdoors. Like my dad was real into driving across the country and seeing the national parks and hiking and backpacking. And my grandparents also owned a cabin at South Lake Tahoe that my brother owns now. And that was like the summer place. So especially since my parents are both teachers, we'd have time often in the summer and we'd just go up. And South Lake Tahoe was like this bastion of awesomeness where we'd be like barefoot all summer and jump in the lake and bike around the meadows. And that was a pretty big, like formative child in the woods sort of thing.
Yeah. And South Lake Tahoe, that's not too far from Sacramento then, is it?
It's like a 2-hour drive.
So that would be easy for you guys to get out there. Okay. Well, that all makes sense. I didn't realize that you had so much of a background kind of being in the outdoors already. I grew up in New Jersey, just outside of New York. And so I've always been much more of a city person. Like that's what I naturally gravitate toward. But I feel myself, like I feel my body kind of getting away from that. And, I've always been down to Mount Rainier and, done hiking in the Pacific Northwest and done all these big hikes around the world as well, like in the Himalayas and Machu Picchu and whatnot. But now I'm like, yeah, the big stuff, right? Go bigger, go big or go home, right? But now I can feel it. Like, I'm like, this is like for people who grew up outdoors, where this was like a normal thing. I'm being drawn much more to that. I totally get that. So,
one thing though I would say about Sacramento is if you don't drive, so if you're a little kid and you are not in charge of your own transportation necessarily, it is suburby. So like my brother and I would spend a lot of time walking down to the school that was near our house and climbing trees or, like walking to this other little park with trees and a little creek. So it's not like we were stuck in a city in Sacramento. It was just more like little urban mini nature adventures because I don't know, I guess
Did you feel like it was safe? Like, is that what you mean? It's kind of like a safe place, and it had parks? Because right now, like, I just think parents it seems like they're so reluctant to let kids out of their sight.
Well, that's what I was going to add on to that for whatever reason, like our parents trusted us to at least wander not too far from home, I guess. I don't know. I have no idea what went into their calculation about where we could walk and where we could not walk, but it if you listen to my mom now, she lives in a very unsafe neighborhood, which I think is not true. But I'm always looking at things a little bit more optimistically, I think.
Oh, she thinks she lives in an unsafe neighborhood?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, I don't think so. It seemed pretty safe to me. Yeah. Well, I mean, and she strikes me as somebody who would be like, "You're 8. Go do what, like, go figure it out." You know, really fostering that independence. I mean, she spoke French to you guys when you were growing up, didn't she?
Yes, and still does for the most part.
And still, I know, actually, when I walked into her house to talk to her, she was on the phone with you and speaking French.
Oh, really?
And I was like, that's really interesting. Did you ever think that was weird when you were growing up, or did your friends think that was weird or make you feel that it was weird?
I don't remember thinking, I don't really remember what I thought about it. I think it was just normal because that's what I knew. And then maybe when I got to school and was maybe more aware and people didn't have that experience, maybe I was like, oh, that's kind of unusual.
You only speak English at home?
I know. Well, no one ever made me feel bad about it or anything. You know, no one was ever like, that's weird. Your mom's weird. I think if anything, people have been like, wow, that's cool. You speak 2 languages. Like, it's a free language, you know, and it made learning Spanish a lot easier.
Oh, sure. So do you know Spanish also?
Mm-hmm.
Why and when did you learn Spanish?
I started teaching Spanish in high school. There was like a foreign language requirement, and I thought, well, I could take French, but that would be silly. So I might as well learn something new. It's funny, actually, because if I sit down to read a book in Spanish or in French, I'm not good at reading French. Like, I'm really good at understanding French. And once I'm into it for a while, I can speak it okay. But I didn't grow up reading it. So I'm not illiterate, but it's hard for me to read French.
Oh, that's interesting.
And when I go to read Spanish, I'm not great. Like, I probably read at like a 6th grade level maybe, but that's what I expect given my knowledge of Spanish, you know? So like the cognitive dissonance of reading French is much more than reading Spanish, even though I'm much better at French. I don't know if that makes sense.
I have to trust you on that because I just don't know, but what is it about French, if you can speak it fluently, that makes it difficult to read? Is it because the words are more sophisticated than your level of French, or is it something about like the conjugation that makes it different?
That's a good question. I think a lot of people have this experience, like people who come up, like their family comes from Mexico and they speak Spanish, but the kids don't grow up reading Spanish necessarily because it's not taught in schools. I think a lot of people have this experience of like understanding a language really well, but then not having practiced reading it. It's just hard, kind of just like being illiterate in English if you never learned how to read English. But also the words sometimes in French specifically don't look the way they sound because of the way they're conjugated. So it's like a whole hodgepodge of things that make it hard for me to read. If I sit down and puzzle it out, I can do it, but it just seems like it takes a lot more effort than I think it should, given my understanding of spoken French.
Okay. That's fair enough. Where did you go to a university?
Yeah, that's why I moved to Portland, was to go to Lewis and Clark College.
Oh, okay, great. What'd you study there?
I studied English, like English literature. And then I went back and studied teaching.
Was the intention to be an English teacher or literature teacher?
Yeah, I kind of thought when I graduated, I would go on and like get a PhD in literature and teach English in college somewhere. And I have to say, I'm very glad I did not follow that path.
Why is that?
I don't know. I have some friends who sort of did that. Like one of my really good friends, her partner is an English PhD, and she's kind of been following him around. And it's just like, it takes a really long time, like 7 to 8 years potentially. And it just seems like a very cutthroat environment. And then you're basically at the whim of the job market, you know, like you get this fancy PhD in modernist English literature, according to Virginia Woolf or whatever. And then you're like, okay, I need a job. And then you take whatever job you get, which might be in like the middle of nowhere or somewhere you'd never want to live, you know?
Right,
so
right.
I'm glad that I've been able to craft my life more according to what I want and not like at the whim of some job market. I don't know. So
you're following your love of outdoors, but you're still writing because you have a wonderful blog that's called carfreerambles.org, right? That's where people can find it. Mm-hmm. And your writing is wonderful.
Oh, it's very
It's very fun. It's very upbeat and conversational. So it's like just a fun read for sure.
I have no sense of that because it's me writing it. Like I have no idea how it sounds, you know?
Oh, really?
Yeah. Zero. My mom is always like, "You're a great writer." I'm like, "You're my mom. You have to tell me that."
Oh, that's interesting. So you don't have a sense of that. Well, then let me tell you something else that is a bit of feedback that, maybe there's just people don't have an opportunity to have a conversation like this and to give you that feedback. But your emails are so conversational and so friendly. Do you know that? Do you realize that? Like, just like you're writing,
No.
you're right. So if you're telling me that you're writing like on your blog, that you don't kind of realize how it's perceived because it's just you, that I'm assuming that you don't know that about your emails as well. So that's why I said I'll tell you that. But just the feedback is that like I immediately liked you via email because I'm like, she's so friendly. Like this is just a super friendly person. And I even told John something, my husband, I even said something to him about it. I'm like, I can't wait to just meet her and talk to her because she's just so friendly. And he's like, well, what do you mean? And then I read him one of your emails and he's like, oh yeah, I see what you mean. It was like just kind of an innocuous thing. But yeah, anyway, so it's interesting to me that you don't spend more time like trying to craft or to insert joke here or like to be like I'm going to be funny and conversational, and then it just comes out supernaturally like that for you. Anyway, your mom's right. You're a great writer, and wherever it comes from, whether it just comes from your heart or it comes from your studies, as an English major, there's something in there that just kind of comes out that makes a person want to read more because it's like, oh, like that's like, yeah, it's I don't know, it's very inviting. That's the way it is. It's very inviting. So I encourage people to go check it out. I'll link to it in the show notes, but it's carfreerambles.org. And there's wonderful posts in there about your adventures, about your biking and your hiking and your bear encounters and
Indeed.
all sorts of stuff, which is a lot of fun. I'm making an assumption that you probably don't have like 1 million readers a month on your blog. You probably don't even pay attention, do you?
I don't pay attention to it, no. I can look, but I don't really pay attention to it.
Yeah.
But I assume it's mostly people I know already, with the exception of some people who sometimes leave comments. I'm like, I have no idea who that is, and I love it.
Oh, that's fun.
Something.
Yeah, that's fun. You kind of fly under the radar, and
yes.
I know you've made it a point to tell me that, and other than your blog and the stuff that your mom sends out about you. They're very proud mom.
I don't see that stuff. I see the stuff she sends out about my brother, but not stuff she sends out about me.
No, I think it was last week she sent something out about Alex. I can't even remember what it was, but she sent something out and then she immediately followed it with like, and the other one, and like, and here's another one or something like that. One. Well, no. That sounds terrible. But it was like, but no, like I'm proud of my daughter also. And then it was an article that came out in the Tabor Times, I think it was.
Oh, the Mount Tabor. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've got this wonderful blog. You stay under the radar. Would you be horrified if you did have 1 million, 1 million views a month? Would you be like, no, that's not what I wanted?
I don't know. Sometimes I play that thought experiment, like, what would it be like to be famous? Because I think about my brother. I don't know. It's hard to predict what that would be like. I kind of like being incognito, and I kind of like being under the radar. I think I'd probably be more careful about what I wrote, and that could be good or bad. I don't know. I mean, I'm always kind of aware, like, I'm putting something on the internet. This is going to live forever on the internet, and people are going to look at it could potentially look at it later and be like, wow, Stasia sure was a bigot or whatever. Like, I can't believe she said this thing that made sense at the time that probably I've changed my mind about anyway. But so I'm always a little bit aware of that, but I think I would be more aware of that kind of thing. Like, anything I write could be used against me 20 years from now.
Do you ever talk to Alex about his fame, about what he thinks about it? And you don't have to answer for him.
Yeah.
I'm not asking that. It's just more of a curious question of whether that dialogue, since you have kind of the, like you said, the thought experiment, I'm wondering if there's been if you have any thinking around that based on what he's had to kind of endure.
That's a good question. We don't talk about it like in those terms exactly, but certainly as someone close to my brother, I've seen how it has changed his life, and it's actually funny now. This is less the case now, but sometimes when he comes to Portland, like we'd be out doing something, we'd bike around, and then we'd stop at the store on the way home, and we'd be hanging out and be like, yeah, I'm hanging out with my brother. And then someone in the store would be like, hey, can I take a picture with you? And I'd be like, oh, I forgot that that's a thing, that people want to take a picture with you. So I feel like it's been funny to see that change.
Well, he doesn't seem like a media hound. I mean, he's done extraordinary things and he should be recognized for it, but it seems like you guys were raised in a not beating your chest kind of fashion.
Yeah, I would agree with that very much so. I think we're both pretty, I don't know, like modest to a fault sometimes. Like, how people talk about like no big deal Honnold or whatever. I feel like I've got that too. Like, oh, nothing's like a big deal. Nothing was that, I don't know, like I just did this thing and it was a thing that I wanted to do and it's not that impressive.
Yeah. I want to talk about some of those things that you've done. But let me first ask a question of like, you've done cool things that we'll talk about, but do you ever feel maybe a little sense of responsibility of, I've done something cool and others can do it too, so I should talk about it so that others realize it's possible? I
think that mentality, like I want other people to realize this is possible, is actually a big driving force. But I don't know that I feel necessarily like responsible for it in that way, just because, again, like you said, I'm pretty incognito. Like I don't know that it would really affect that many people. I feel like where I have effect is in my like small circle of people, like, oh, you could do this too. And I feel like that makes more sense coming from someone that you already know, who is like a normal person. Like if I read someone's blog and they were doing this crazy adventure, I would probably be inspired by their adventure, but wouldn't necessarily think like, oh, I can do that too necessarily, unless I knew that they had come from someplace like I had come from. I don't know. So yes, I feel that drive, but I also don't know how it manifests exactly.
Yeah. So you see it more, like you said, more in your like immediate community rather than feeling the need of having 1 million followers. Here's what Stasia's doing, Yeah,
I don't know. Because then it crosses over into this weird like cult of celebrity too, that I just like everything about that disgusts me. Like I do not like the idea of being like, oh, everybody wants to be like Stasia, like I think that's gross. So I don't know. That's why maybe I just have a problem, I don't know, troubled relationship with any sort of fame because it starts feeling yucky to me. I don't know.
Yeah. I, like one of the reasons why I started the podcast was because I had done some things that I think were kind of neat, like running my first marathon at 50 and, running 5 marathons that year. I'm escalating the kind of adventures that I'm having. They keep getting bigger. And I think that a lot of people in my community will look at me and say, well, that's Beth. Beth is a runner. She can do that. And my point is that not only do I think running is accessible to a lot of people, a lot more people than, a lot more people can run than think they can run, because I didn't start running until my late 40s, basically. But the point of having the podcast is to talk to people like you and be able to say, like, I know that you do run, but you also bike and you also do these other things. And it's for people to hear these conversations and then reflect on their own lives and what is it that I like to do that I might be able to turn my hobby or my interest or my love into something, and just have a little bit of boost of confidence that it's possible for them?
You obviously have this figured out way better than I do. I love that.
Yeah, I don't know. But also, if I do a speaking engagement, why aren't there 500 people in the audience? Or,
Yeah.
why aren't there 1 million readers on my blog? Why isn't the audience bigger? Why isn't my community bigger? So I am different already, than you are in terms of that. But that's a whole nother psychological experiment that we won't go down. When you get to interview me, we'll talk about that.
Yeah, I'll start a podcast. That would be great.
Yeah,
No,
please.
I'll do like a blog series. I don't think I'd be good at a podcast. It'd have to be in writing.
Yeah, that's fine. That's totally fine. Anyway, let's talk about those things that you've done. So you grew up in an environment where you were getting out quite a bit, not only in South Lake Tahoe, but also just in your own community. You went to college, and after university, did you try to pursue any kind of a career in utilizing your degree? Or did you think like, nope, I got to get out in the woods and feed my soul?
I was not sure what I wanted to do after college. And I'm really grateful that when I lived in Portland then, there was still a little bit of space to not have to work a lot and not have to make a lot of money. Like I had enough money and enough family support to say like, I'm going to take this year after college and figure out what I want to do. And I had a tutoring job. So I was making a little bit of money tutoring for 2 families. And I basically my roommate and I got a spot, like an apartment in Lake Oswego for $800 a month. and I tutored and decided that I wanted to go back to school for teaching. So I actually went back and I got my master's in teaching after that and taught middle school. This is a little known fact of Stasia that I taught middle school for a bunch of years also.
During that time, were you biking and hiking and getting out and living a car-free life at that point?
I feel like that is the time where the car-free life, I'm using air quotes here, where the car-free life actually started. Because in college, I was living near campus. I was biking to school or walking, but everything I needed was pretty close. So it wasn't like I had no need for a car and I never really thought about a car. But then when we moved after college, Lake Oswego was suddenly much further from everything that I did. And that's when people started saying, are you going to buy a car? Now's the time to buy a car. You're out of college. So where's the car? And I had this very clear idea that I did not want to buy a car. I didn't know how to fix the car. I didn't know how to take care of a car. I had zero interest in learning how to do those things. And I didn't have a lot of money, and I didn't want to buy a car. But what I did do was I bought a nice road bike and I started biking everywhere. And I realized that biking was really fun when you have a nice light road bike. It was not a fancy bike, but it was a much fancier bike than I'd ever had before. And I still have it actually, and I still love it.
And Portland's got a pretty good biking system there, within the city, don't they? A lot of bike paths?
Yeah. Actually, probably the spots where I grew up biking in Portland are the worst for biking. Southwest Portland and Lake Oswego are typically not as great with bike lanes. I don't know why that is. But yeah, biking in Portland is pretty great. It's hard for me actually to imagine moving anywhere else and being able to bike as well in a city. And then safely, there are a lot of separated bike paths and whole neighborhood streets that are prioritized for people moving by their own power. And I love that so much.
So your car-free life, that's kind of around the time that your car-free life started. And what was the transition into the WTA and really kind of spending more time outdoors, as work? As
work. That probably happened after I left teaching. So I was living in Lake Oswego. I went and I got my master's in teaching, and then I started teaching middle school, which was great. And middle schoolers are fantastic. I think that's probably kind of when I started feeling wow, I'm spending all of my time in a building and all of these kids are spending all of their time in a building. I try to take them out and read and write outside. But I think that's really when I started feeling wow, a career or whatever is really indoor centric for a lot of people. And I was having a hard time with that. And the district that I worked for just happened to be going through budget cuts and offered a buyout basically for contract status teachers after my 3rd year of teaching, I think. And I was well, maybe this is my chance to try new things. Like I'll get like a little bit of a lump sum of money so I don't have to worry about working immediately. Maybe I'll try to travel, try to volunteer, try to get some different skills.
Wow. So just after 3 years, you were offered a buyout package.
Yeah, because it was just like a budget. They're trying to mitigate budget cuts, basically.
Yeah.
Like, well, if people will leave voluntarily, then maybe we don't have to lay people off, I guess was the rationale.
Right. Okay, that makes sense.
I think in reality what happened is like all the newer teachers with a lot of energy and enthusiasm left because they were like, I can find something new. And all the people who were like really entrenched and kind of over it stayed because they were like... so I don't know that was the best strategy for the long term, but it worked well for me.
So that it bought you a little bit of time to make decisions.
Yeah, and I did. I volunteered and I got into like naturalism and like nature interpretation and teaching, so like teaching outdoors. And then from there, I started working with kids outdoors, like environmental education. And then like I led a youth crew doing restoration work for a long time. And then that transitioned over to Washington Trails Association.
And then how do you fit in these journeys that you take? Do you just take your vacation time and head out?
Lots of ways. I guess, so when I was teaching, I had winter breaks and summer breaks where I could do some adventuring, so like longer chunks of time. And then after that, my first 2 environmental education jobs would have sort of baked in chunks of time off. So like my last job before WTA was on a community college schedule. So like the breaks between terms, if I was smart about the way I did my work, I could just sort of disappear for 2 weeks or sometimes 3 weeks and use vacation also. At WTA, that's less the case. And I was actually nervous about that when I took this job. It's like, wait, I'm used to having long chunks of time where I can just go somewhere. But we have a pretty great vacation package, and my work has been pretty flexible around like, if I work a lot one week, I can work less the next week sometimes, assuming that everything's still covered. So yeah, hodgepodge, random time off, taking vacation time. I think part of it is just like, it makes me very uncomfortable sometimes to ask for time off because I feel like, especially in the US, we have this culture of like, you have to work all the time. And if you're not working, you're lazy. And, like mental health is not really a thing as a message that I think often gets put out through workplaces. And I think I've just had to get more comfortable with asking and saying like, I want to take this time off. Like I have this vacation time, I'm going to use it. And that doesn't mean I'm not invested. Yeah.
And especially working for an outdoor organization, you would think that there might be a little bit more flexibility in that. Like, I think it's difficult in the technology world, as an example, or just someone who's got like an office job. It's just not as natural for people to ask for that time off or to take off, the time that they have. I know people who don't take any vacation and it just all gets built up. I'm like, oh my God, please take a vacation.
Yeah. Although that being said, there are lots of cool things to do in a weekend, or like 3 days. Like it doesn't have to always be 2-week chunks of adventure to be. I like it that way, but I've definitely had good weekend adventures, So it's not to say that if you don't have large chunks of time off, you can't have adventures.
Well, what's a standout adventure that you've taken that we should know about?
Standout adventure. What genre of standout adventure are you talking?
Well, you know what? I know you mentioned to me, I think you took a train up to Whitefish, was it? And then you biked around. Talk about that.
That was a pretty great adventure. I got it in my head that I wanted to go to Yellowstone and the Grand Tetons. And, I still don't have a car. So it's like, okay, I'll bike there. But biking from Portland is a little bit too far. So I took Amtrak. You can take your bike on Amtrak pretty easily. I took Amtrak to Whitefish, Montana, and then I biked south through all of Montana and went to Yellowstone and camped there for a little bit, and went to the Grand Tetons and camped there for a little bit, and biked my way back to Whitefish and took the train back to Portland.
What time of year was that?
That was September, I believe, like early September.
So that sounds really daunting to me, and I'll tell you why, and then you can like kind of maybe dispel the myth of it and tell me how I'm wrong or how it can be easier. But I think logistically, I'm like, wow, I'm going to have like a lot of gear because I've got to have the bike, and then I've got to have food and clothes, and I've got to have rain gear and all sorts of like prepare myself for a lot of uncomfortable things, and a tent and sleeping bag and everything. So right there, I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't even know where to start with that. I don't even know how to fix a tire, on a bike. So like, I know I need to YouTube it or get myself to REI to figure that out.
It's actually fairly easy.
Okay. See, like that to me seems really intimidating right there. Like right there, it feels intimidating. But then, in addition to that, I think, well, really, you can bike through Tetons. It's a narrow road to as far as I remember, it's kind of a narrow road and there's wild animals, how do you protect yourself? So there's all these things. And then it's like I don't feel this so much just because I've done so much traveling on my own, but I would imagine that a lot of women might say, yeah, but you're going to be on your own. Isn't that really scary? You're going to be camping all by yourself. Am I totally wrong about those things? And then how would you suggest someone overcome that?
No, I think those are all totally legit concerns and all things that I've felt at various times. And I feel like I should go back in time here and just say the very first bike adventure I ever took was because my partner had bought me a bike trailer for my birthday. And I was like, great, I have a bike trailer now. So not like bags that you put on your bike, not like if you're imagining your average touring setup, it looked nothing like that. It's just like a trailer that I would pull behind my bike.
You might see like a kid being pulled, right?
Totally,
okay.
Totally like a kid trailer, but without the kid, without the seat too. And I was like, okay, I have a trailer. Maybe I can go camp somewhere. And I decided I had like a sleeping bag and a tent and stuff. So I had the basic gear and it didn't have to be small. It didn't have to be lightweight or anything because it just all went in the trailer, like a big mess in the trailer. And I biked to this little state park that's in the Columbia River Gorge. It's probably like 30 miles from my house. It's not very far. And I was like, I'm just going to bike to Ainsworth State Park. I'm going to camp there. I'm going to go for a hike if I'm feeling it, and I'm going to bike home. And I biked out there with my trailer and I set up my tent, and I don't think done this kind of thing on my own before. And I set up my tent and I was so nervous, irrationally nervous, like somebody would want my campsite and I'd have to fight them for it, or that I was in the wrong spot, or that somebody would bother me, or, any number of things could happen. And I was so nervous about it. And I was in my tent and I was hiding because I didn't want people to know I was there for some reason. And there's this male voice outside my tent that was like, hello. And I was like, oh my God, is someone coming to assault me or something? And it was the ranger, and he was bringing me money back because I'd overpaid. And I was like,
oh my
okay,
gosh.
this is okay. I was calm down, you're fine. There are people here. Nothing's going to happen. And I did go for a little mini hike, and I came back and I slept, and then I packed up and I biked home the next day. And it was in comparison, a very small adventure, but it was a very big step, I feel for me to be okay, this is something I can do. It was scary for me, but I did it and I'm okay. And I have just that much more confidence now that it's something that I can do. And I feel my whole progression has been that. So if you had told me in that moment, 5 years from now, you're going to be biking through Montana by yourself with bear spray, I feel that's crazy. Nobody would do that. But at every time I do something, I just gain a little bit more confidence that it's something that is possible and I can take care of myself and I can handle whatever issues come up. That's what I would say to people who are afraid of all of those things at once, tackle them one at a time.
Right. Baby steps. Yeah. Your story reminded me of something that I went through. I rode my motorcycle from Seattle to Panama.
Wow.
Yeah. Solo. And I remember my biggest fear, everybody thought I was going to die on that trip. I had people thinking that I'm going to be raped and I'm going to be kidnapped and they're going to steal my bike and all of these things. And I was never concerned about that. What I was concerned about was pulling up to a gas station and getting off to have to pump gas and my bike tipping over. That was my biggest fear, was looking like an idiot at the gas station.
Totally.
But all of these other things, having federales in Mexico pulling guns on, pulling a gun on me, that stuff was never a concern to me. It was this one little thing that I focused on that I was so nervous about.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think it's interesting because, everyone's going to be afraid of different things, and it's easy to look at someone else and be like, well, it's a stupid thing to be afraid of, but, it all comes from a place that makes sense to whoever it is, What I've learned is that, I'm not going to not be afraid of things ever, but I've learned that I can overcome that, I guess. I will be afraid of something, but then I'll show myself that it's not as big of a deal that I might have thought it was. Like, I bet you didn't tip over and look like an idiot that much, did you?
No, I never tipped over. The other thing it reminds me too, I guess I just have a fear of looking like a fool, because the other thing that I have this really irrational fear about, and I told someone this once and she was like, "What?" And I was like, "Oh, it's me. It's not, this isn't just like a common thing." Yeah. But I get really nervous when I go to another, even city, like even New York, or if I go to another city or a country and I have to use public transportation and I don't know how to pay for it. I don't know how it works. Like, I want to come up with the definitive guide to public transportation around the world. Like, I just wish there was that thing, because I'm like, do I need exact change? Do I pay by a card? Do I do this?
Do I have holding people up behind me? Yeah.
Yes, they're all going to look at me and think I'm a jerk. Totally. So I have this whole thing
I feel that.
Like, I will jump a turnstile before I have to ask somebody for help, basically.
That's funny.
So anyway, I know that the thing that you were talking about, you have all these things in your head of, what happens if this, what if somebody I'm going to get into an argument with somebody about about my camping spot, which is so funny, it's like, it gets worked out. And people,
like nobody's gonna,
right. And people, in general, people who go camping or go hiking, it's just a different sort of person in general, that's going to be much more helpful to you, like the park ranger, than somebody who's going to give you a hard time too.
I had this is another maybe like seminal moment in realizing that this kind of thing is possible, but one of my first longer bike trips was down the California coast, which I picked because there's really no route finding involved. You're just going down the coast. I mean, there's a little bit of route finding involved, but it's very easy to plan. And there are all these hiker biker sites where you can stop, and there are sites that are reserved for people who have hiked or biked in, and they're just like $5 or $7 a night. And it's really nice because then you're not competing with people who have driven there and gotten there early. You just like know that you're going to have a space. And I pulled into one on the coast, and there was a site like just a little ways up with these two guys in it, and it just felt weird. Like, it looked like they've been living there for a long time, and I was like, I'm not really sure what to feel about this. And I realized I was really nervous about camping there. It's like, what if they're like crazy rapists? Like who are these people? And I had this moment where I was like, Stasia, you could be nervous about them all night and hide in your tent, or you could just go say hi and like talk to them and get a sense of where they're at, like maybe you'll find out that they do seem crazy and you want to leave, and then you'll know. Or maybe you'll find out that they're just like normal people who are just out there enjoying life also, and then you'll feel so much better the rest of the night. So I did, and I went and I talked to them, and they were like, they'd been living there for a while, but they were totally chill, and they warned me about the raccoons. And then for the rest of the night, I was like, okay, like we've had this connection, like I don't need to be afraid of them. Like, I sussed it out, it's fine. And I think about that frequently when I'm nervous about something. Is there a way that I can do something actively to make myself or give myself more information to decide if I need to be nervous about it or not? And if I really need to be nervous about it, maybe I'll leave. And if I don't, then now I know.
Were there other people at that campsite? Like anybody else around?
No, it's just me and those two dudes, which is why I was like, I don't know, this feels a little weird. But yeah, it's totally fine.
I mean, it seems like I might be a little bit nervous just going to talk to them, like, oh, now they know that I'm by myself kind of thing. But
yeah, that's true. I probably thought about that, but I don't remember that anymore.
Yeah, good. Well, it turned out to be a positive experience. Yeah. So what other kinds of adventures do you take just on your own? It's mostly domestic travel, is that right? And you really focus on kind of the car-free thing. I know occasionally, I think I read on your blog that you've borrowed a friend's car to go on a hiking trip, but in general...
Forgot to lock it.
Oh, yeah, and you forgot to lock the car. Yeah, and you had to go back for it, to lock up their car. But do you, in general, you will bike to like a trailhead? And I had never heard of this before. Like, it never occurred to me that there might be, like at a trailhead, there might be a bike kind of hiding somewhere, like, locked to a tree, and there's somebody out hiking. Because to me, it's just so normal that you just get in the car and you go to the trailhead.
Yeah, to me, that is totally not normal. In fact, it felt really weird the other day. I borrowed a car to go backpacking, and I hiked out and got in the car to drive home. I was like, this feels so weird. But yeah, I think, so when I started biking adventures, I think it was mostly just biking and then, camping off the road somewhere and then biking more. and maybe taking a small hike here and there if I happen to go past something. But for a long time then I was a little bit sad about, I either take a bike trip or I go hiking or backpacking somewhere. And I didn't like that it was either or. And the more I got to thinking about it, I was like, well, why couldn't I just bike to a trailhead that someone would drive to and go backpacking? It's all the same gear, the same backpack or the same sleeping bag, the same tent, like the same sleeping tent, the same food. Yeah, I just started trying to think about why should I be limited to only biking certain places? Like, why couldn't I just bike to a rugged trailhead and then go backpacking there?
And you didn't know other people who were doing this. This was just something that you were like, oh wait, I can transition into this.
I still don't know other people who are doing this, to be honest. I'm not really sure why, because it makes the whole thing an adventure. Like when you drive to a trailhead, it's like you've got the commute, and then you have the adventure. And like when I bike to a trailhead, the whole thing is an adventure. It's so great. It's like the bike ride there is a super unusual thing that I haven't done already, perhaps. And the bike ride is nice, and then the backpacking is an adventure, and then I get to bike home too. Like it's all. So,
but that really limits how far away you can get, right? So, like you're living in Portland. How far away do you go for like a weekend adventure?
Well, weekends are harder, but being in Portland is helpful because there's the Amtrak train, so I can, when it's not COVID and I want to get on the train, I can put my bike on the train and easily be south to Eugene or up to Seattle. And then that expands my reach. So I've done a lot of stuff I took the train to Mount Vernon to go to the North Cascades just to make that commute a little bit less of a bike trek.
And then that's a weekend trip for you? That's a weekend trip?
No, that wasn't a weekend trip. That was, I think, a week and a half. But
I see. Okay.
Trip, so for me, comfortably right now, for 2 days, I'd probably bike up to 60 miles, like one day and then 60 miles the next day. That's probably further than a lot of people would want to bike, but also less far than other people would want to bike. So yeah, for just a weekend, there's a handful of places around Portland that I'll go. Or maybe, take the train to Eugene and then bike somewhere. Like I could go to the coast and come back in a weekend. But that is actually why I like bigger chunks of time off, I think, because then I can expand my reach a little bit.
Is Amtrak running now? I mean, I'm assuming they are.
I believe so. Yeah, I feel like I've gotten emails from them saying, like, here's the safety protocols we're following. So I think I could. I just am not sure how I feel about being indoors with people for a while.
What kind of bike do you have?
I have 2 bikes right now. I have the one that I bought when I moved to Lake Oswego right after college. I still have that old road bike. And then probably like 6 or 7 years ago now, with the help of my friends, I built myself a bike from the frame. So it's like a steel road bike frame. And yeah, my friend and I built it up together to be exactly the way I wanted it to be. At the time he worked at a bike shop. So he helped me like order all the parts and know what I needed and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I wouldn't even know where to start with that. Like, what is it that's different or customized about it that you couldn't find on off the shelf?
I also, like, if I were just going to build a bike from nothing, I would need help. Like, I can't do it by myself. But there were some things that I cared about. Like, I wanted the bike to be steel, but not super heavy, because steel, I felt like if something broke, I could potentially fix the frame, unlike with an aluminum or a carbon bike. So I wanted steel and I wanted disc brakes. And that's just because commuting through the winter, I felt like I was running through, like, destroying my bicycle tire rims super quickly. Like every year and a half, I'd have to buy new wheels. And with disc brakes, you're not actually braking on the rim of the wheel, you're braking on the hub, so you don't destroy your wheels quickly. But I wanted steel, I wanted disc brakes, and I wanted a lot of carrying capacity because I was over the trailer. So I wanted to be able to put bags and stuff on my bike. Yeah. And yeah, some other like little things. He helped me figure that stuff out as we were building it.
I need a bike mechanic friend.
It's very helpful.
Yeah, to figure it out. You are super inspirational. We still have a lot to talk about because I want to talk about your running also. But I will say, as we are sitting here talking, the wheels are spinning. And I'm like, oh,
nice. Right.
Honestly, I've been trying to figure out how to get out of here, because of COVID. And we're not locked down here. Certainly we've been out hiking and that sort of thing. But is it possible to, this is what we're thinking. rent out the house, go to Hawaii for an extended period of time. And we are just like, we're waiting for Hawaii to open, like that you can get tested and then go to Hawaii without having being quarantined. And being quarantined, if we were going to be there for a couple months, being quarantined, for a couple weeks wouldn't be a big deal. But we're kind of waiting just out of respect, for when they're ready for visitors.
Totally.
So, but now I'm thinking, well, gosh, like that California coast trip, minimize contact, pack up a bunch of dehydrated food and get a couple of bikes, get them outfitted and head south, where the weather's going to be nicer, where it's going to turn to crap. It'll start to turn to crap. If you have
like a water filter and stuff, you're pretty self-sufficient. Like
totally. We're all set with that. Yeah. The interesting thing is that this year I was supposed to run a bunch of events. We might have talked about this. The four deserts. Yeah. And so I've actually got this bin here in my office that is filled with stuff that I could live on for a week. Like it's dehydrated food. It's like, all this high protein stuff, all these snacks, and then it's backpack, sleeping bag, everything that I would have needed for that. Yeah. So I am totally set. So if like that is my bug out box, if I need to, all I have to do is pick that up and walk out and
strap it to the back of your bicycle.
Yeah, could do that. Yeah, or get a little trailer and pull my trailer. So I'm all set in terms of that stuff, but it's like nowhere to go. Where to go? But anyway, you're totally inspiring me about the possibilities, because this is exactly why you need to be talking to people, because I don't really know you, and people who are listening don't know you. But when you hear a story like this, you go, oh my gosh, look at the possibilities. Look at the things that I could do with my life if I knew about them, if I knew that they existed. And then it's like, oh, she could do it. She figured it out. You should write a guidebook for it, by the way. But, there's not like, there may not be a guidebook, but when you just start thinking out of the box, you just realize there's so many possibilities, so many things that we can do with our lives. And even though we are under restriction, there's still things that we could do, and many people have more time on their hands, than they'd like. Like we could just put it to good use. There's so many things we could do.
I read this really great article that was talking about the idea of positive constraints. So, like what you're saying about like having the rules that you can't break. It was kind of talking, the premise was about Dr. Seuss, and he wrote this book because of a bet that he couldn't write a children's book using 50 words or less or something. And I think it was Green Eggs and Ham. I could be remembering this wrong. But that idea that like constraints can actually spur creativity, and that if you have like, you can't cross these lines, how you have to work within them, that can actually be like a really awesome force for thinking outside the box and being creative. And I've been thinking about that a lot with pandemic, especially because I'm like, okay, we have these constraints. Like I can't hug my friends. I can't go to places and buy things in stores outside of my community. But within those confines, like how can I make my life the best life possible within those confines? And then trying to spend my energy there instead of spending my energy being annoyed that I can't do certain things. So on good days, that works really well for me. And on bad days, sometimes I'm like,
Yeah, I was going to ask you how long did it take you to come to that? And then is it a consistent thing, or it's an up and down thing for you?
Yeah. That was actually, I read that before coronavirus, that idea of positive constraints. So that's been kicking around in my mind for a while now.
Well, you probably approach your whole car thing like that. Is that a fair assessment? That like having a car ties into that?
I think so. I mean, I've never seen not having a car as a hardship. Like to me, it's actually really freeing because first of all, there's just a whole pile of money that I don't have to make because I don't have to pay for a car, because I don't have to pay for gas, because I don't have to pay for insurance. That is really that's inherently freeing to me, because that means that I can take a lower paying job. I cannot work as many hours. There's like a whole host of things based on that decision not to own a car that have been very freeing in my life. So I've never really seen that as a constraint per se, like a negative thing, but it does make me be creative about, like getting out for the weekends, or, what am I going to find that's cool, that's local, that are like, it has really expanded my idea of what is possible. Like I don't know, am I going to bike through Montana? Sure. I don't need a car for that. Yeah.
What comes to mind for me is, now that we are all, I think it's fair to say, we're all cooking from home more or cooking at home more than we ever did, where like that's a constraint, right? We can't go out to the grocery store and just go to the salad bar, which was a big habit of mine. It's like, oh, I'm just going to go because everything's fresh and I can get a little tofu and I can get, fresh greens and I can get all this stuff. It's like, it's right there. It's so easy. And it's, but it always ends up being more expensive though, too, than if I just made it at home. But, I always thought, wow, this is so easy and everything is so fresh, right? Because they're rotating through it. It's much fresher than what sits in my refrigerator, every few days that I'm using. But now, even though now there's this constraint, I've used it for a positive because now I just have to be more prepared. Like right now I have garbanzo beans sitting in water downstairs and I'm going to make hummus tonight, and I just have to, there has to be a little bit more thinking about preparing and getting things ready, for a meal. So there is positivity to that, but some days I would prefer to just like run over to Whole Foods and get buffalo tofu and, enjoy that, but I can't,
Yeah.
So are you vegan, fully vegan?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that another thing that you look at as it's a constraint, but you use it to make it a positive? Like there's freedom in that?
I guess I wouldn't have called it a constraint exactly. That's just an outgrowth of my values, I feel like, which maybe is a constraint. Like if you think about your values are like the sideboards of your life potentially. But yeah, I've been vegan for 12 or 13 years and was vegetarian for a few years before that. And that's just, me trying to live my values, which I guess is also similar to not having a car, is me trying to live my values.
So what are your values? Do you have like a mission statement or something that is kind of on your mind that you have written down somewhere that you think like these are my core values? Or is it just something that is more maybe a little bit more flexible, or that you just know in your heart is there?
I feel like it'd be very professional for me to have written myself a personal mission statement, but I have not done that.
Well, there's a sorry to interrupt there. Michael Gervais, who's a performance coach, and he works with the Seattle Seahawks, and Coach Carroll there, and he's got a wonderful podcast called Finding Mastery. And he has this exercise that he has people go through of writing their own mission statement. I actually have my own mission statement that comes up as a task on my phone, like every day. So there's a reminder that comes up. Yeah, yes, exactly. And so it's in capital letters, and it's every day to be a living example and to know that I'm a work in progress. So what I do, no matter what it is that I do, I just think, can other people learn from this? Yeah. Is this something that I would be proud of, to share with others so that they could emulate it or think like, oh, I want to be like that. Like that's a good way to be. Now, when I'm driving down the road and I'm honking at somebody or flipping somebody off, like that doesn't fit into my values, right? Totally. That's not part of my mission statement, but I recognize that too. And like you said, there's like a sideboard, there's like, I don't want to go off in the gutter, like in the bowling alley, but there's kind of this thing that kind of keeps me, a little bit more, straight around that. And then also just to give myself a break that I'm a work in progress, that if I, do end up flipping somebody off, on the road, that, okay, so I recognize that and I can be calm, or I can be better next time around. I can avoid that kind of a situation. So that's why the whole mission statement thing is, it's about the values. So.
No, I have friends who are, I guess you might call them life coaches. They do like a lot of coaching like that. And they definitely recommend like writing down a mission statement or a statement of purpose, or I don't remember exactly what they call it, but yeah. Statement
of purpose. That's great.
Yeah. I don't have one personally, but I guess, if you had to sort of zoom out and try to encapsulate like all of my values, kind of about just maybe environmentally focused in the sense of like there's no way to do no harm, but like do less harm. So like being vegan is kind of about, when I stopped eating meat, it was kind of like, I didn't like handling raw meat when I started cooking for myself. And I was like, that's kind of silly for me. If I don't want to handle raw meat, why would I outsource that to somebody else? And similarly, if I don't want to kill an animal, why would I outsource that to somebody else? And I just felt kind of bad about that. So I stopped eating meat for that reason. But then over actually a lot of bike travels where I see just the impact of having tons of cows on the landscape, where you see the gross like the dairy cow cesspools and the way that the creeks get trampled down. There's no vegetation. I don't know if you've ever biked through a lot of rangeland. You can tell that it's rangeland and not other lands. So I got more interested in the environmental impact of meat, and that just added to my not eating it. But then also was like, well, if I'm not eating meat for the same reasons, I should stop eating dairy. So that's where the veganism came from. So I guess, I don't know. I guess I just try to think about, what impact my actions have on the world and the environment and other people. Am I proud about that, or am I not? And if I'm not proud, then I need to change it. That's kind of how I've approached things.
Well, I love that. I think it could just simply be do less harm, right? And then you can work on that on many different levels. There's so many things that encapsulates, and that makes a lot of sense. And then it's got to resonate with you, in your lifestyle as well. And not having a car is something that you can do. A lot of people can't work around that, but you can. You would do well. I live in West Seattle, and we're a peninsula with this one bridge that goes across, and the bridge has failed and it's been shut down. Yeah, it's got cracks in it. And, and they shut it down. They abruptly shut it down. So yeah, we're kind of stuck here.
Does that mean everyone's just stuck?
Yeah, we've got. Actually, I mapped this the other day. I ran to the Space Needle. And the first time it routed me, it said it was 12 miles. And then we actually have this lower bridge that it's reserved for emergency vehicles and pedestrians and bicycles. And it's 6 miles. So it's literally an additional 6 miles to kind of get around to any place if you want to go downtown, which is a total bummer. But as a biker, it would be great for you. It's perfect.
Actually, that's something I love about my commute is when I was going to my office in Vancouver, you have to cross the Columbia River from Portland to Washington. And that bridge, it's either the I-5 bridge or the I-205 bridge. And both of them at commute time are miserable. I bike past so many people who are just stuck in traffic.
I bet.
And I have the reverse commute, so it's not as bad for me if I was driving, I guess, but it's still not good. And I feel sometimes like kind of a smug asshole because I'm like, yes, I love being on my bike and you're all stuck in traffic. That sucks. But it really, it's so freeing to just be biking, and the only limiting factor is my own physical capability, not that I'm stuck in traffic.
And you're not flipping people off either.
No, I'm actually quite happy most of the time. And most people, sometimes I get into close calls, some people, I don't know, it's hard to always have a great biking experience.
Yeah,
but typically I'm very happy, and I'm looking at the birds, I'm looking at the flowers. Life is good on a bicycle.
That sounds great. And you must be all outfitted for bad weather and all prepared for that.
I am now. It's funny. It took me 5 years maybe of biking in Portland to actually buy fenders for my bicycle.
Oh, really?
Because I had this road bike and there wasn't a lot of clearance between the tires and the frame. So I couldn't put fenders on myself. And I was going to school. And I didn't have a lot of money. It's going to be expensive. And I just was like, whatever, I can bike in the rain. And I did, and I got really wet all the time, and I would just change when I got places. And then one year I finally got fenders, and it was life-changing how nice it was.
Isn't that funny?
Why have I not done this for my whole life? But point being, you can make anything work.
Yeah.
But it is a lot nicer to have fenders and rain gear.
Yeah, it's like getting your first comforter for your bed. It's like, oh my God, I'm an adult.
Yeah, totally.
Look how much easier life is with this. Yeah. So in addition to biking and hiking, you also run. Are you mainly a trail runner then, since you're out hiking so much? Do you mostly do trails?
Yeah, as most as I can. Around my house, there's a few trails that I typically run on. But I find that my joints and my knees and my everything is a lot happier if I'm running not on pavement. So yeah, I do try to seek out trails. And I especially love remote trails. but those take a little bit more planning to get to.
What kind of trails did you say?
Remote.
Oh, remote. Yeah.
Far away, mountainous.
So then do you bike to those, or is that when you borrow a car or take Amtrak?
It could be any combination of those things. Recently, I borrowed a car to go run around Mount St. Helens area. I could take Amtrak and my bike to get places. Last year, I have a friend who's really into long distance trail running also. So last year, sometimes we would carpool places and we would run together. That's not obviously happening now. But yeah, it's a lot easier when you can carpool, because I don't feel as bad about carpooling when it's like a few different people in a car and it's not just single occupancy fossil fuel use, which makes my heart sad. So yeah, any combination of ways to get places.
And are you finding more people are on the trails these days?
I'm not sure. Certainly by my house, yes. In Portland, a lot of people are outside at all hours now. It used to be like, oh, it'd be pretty calm during the day, but everyone's working from home or not working. So I would say the rate and the times of usage have probably gone way up, which actually maybe at the beginning made me feel like I shouldn't be running. Because like, there's so many people and I can't give 6 feet of space, and I just didn't feel good about it. So I started getting up super early and running like really, really early when there weren't people out. That's like the one time there aren't going to be a lot of people. It's very, very early.
You sound really disciplined.
Maybe.
Self-motivated?
I don't know. Definitely self-motivated, yes. Yeah, I would say disciplined in the sense of like, if there's something that I want to be doing or think is important to do, I will actually follow through on it. And that's important. You could put that in the value category. Like, that is a value of mine to do what I say I will. And that includes do what I've told myself I will do.
Where does that come from? Being self-motivated? Because seriously, not a lot of people are self-motivated. Like, I don't know what the percentage is. 20% of people maybe are super self-motivated. Like, they can get up and they can bike to work and they can go to the trails on the weekends and they can just stay active or, just like follow through, like you said, follow through what they say they're going to do. I find, people who have a military background for sure, either they brought that with them to the military, like that was something that they were used to, or it's something that they learned while in the military. But there's so many people. I mean, you just look at the number of people who pay for a gym membership or a CrossFit membership because they need to pay for something in order to get motivated enough to do it. But you don't know where yours comes from. Is it a trait that you very much say that your brother has it. Do you recall, like, can you say like, oh yeah, that's something that my mom instilled in us?
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that parenting was involved somehow. Like, I don't know. But that's the kind of thing that's sort of invisible, I think, to you as a child. Like, I don't really know. But certainly my mom was very disciplined as well. So maybe it's just like, that's what we saw. I was going to say or add though, I feel like in some ways biking and not having a car has really fed into this and helped me with it, because I have so many now years of lived experience of, this looks like it's not going to be fun, but I have to do it. Like when it's raining super hard, I'm like, oh, I don't want to get on my bike, but like I have to because I have to bike home from work, And like years and years of doing that, and then it being much better than it seems like it would be, taking the hard first step, and it being like, oh, this actually is kind of nice now that I'm out here. I think I have a very large bank of knowledge that taking the first hard step is the hardest thing. And then after that, it's going to be better. I think that biking has helped with that. And I think that I draw on that a lot when there are things that I don't necessarily want to do, but I do know deep in my heart, I'm going to feel good that I did later.
I do know that feeling of like, I will feel worse if I don't get up and go for a run in the morning, later, even if I say, oh, I'll do it later today, I never get around to it. But you always feel better, if you can just do it, then you don't, it's really rare that you end your exercise and say, oh man, I wish I hadn't done that. I'm so bummed. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I feel like that is a muscle, like that's the more you practice that, the easier it is to remember and draw from it. I don't know.
Yeah, I was thinking about something similar like that recently. I'm not much of a drinker. Like I'll have a couple of glasses of champagne, maybe a couple of times a year. And I was thinking recently, I was like, oh yeah, I don't ever wake up in the morning and go, boy, I wish I drank more last night?
Yeah, totally. I really wish I had a hangover right now.
Yeah, exactly. Because there's sometimes I think, oh, like dinner with friends, and it would be nice to, have a glass of Prosecco. And I just don't. I'm like, no, this isn't the one time this year that I want to use that on. Kind of, I'll wait for my birthday or New Year's. And then the next morning I'm like, I think I'm really glad I didn't use up my twice a year occasion, last night. Yeah. And then it's like, oh, it's kind of funny. It's like, yeah, you don't wake up and go, I wish I drank more last night.
Yeah, totally.
I wish I had that second piece of chocolate cake, But that's the whole mind trick, isn't it? That you have to put yourself in
look ahead.
Yeah, you have to put yourself in the future whether it's like an hour after the run, like, oh, how am I going to feel in an hour? Or how am I going to feel after I eat that box of chocolates? Like if you can just stop and think about that, then you can make that wise choice. Is this doing more harm or less harm?
Yes, exactly.
Kind of figure it out. Oh, I wanted to ask you about this. I read this in one of your blog posts, and I thought it was really interesting. You mentioned that you and your friends got together and you wrote each other a 6-word biography about each other, which I thought that was really interesting. And your friend wrote about you, always moving, but running from what?
Or something along those lines. I don't remember it exactly.
Yeah. I pulled it directly from that. Yeah. So I just thought that was, I thought that was so neat. Do you feel like you're running from something, or do you just feel like you're running?
No, I do not feel like I'm running from anything. But friends often have perspective on your life that you don't have. So I was like, I should entertain this idea. Like maybe he's right. Maybe there is something, because it is definitely a theme in my life, like to stay in motion, like be in motion all the time and being crazy when I sit still. But no, I don't. I think I just like being active.
Do you stay active for the fitness aspect of it? Do you do it to be outdoors, or do you just do it because you can't stop yourself?
All of the above. My partner and I joke about like needing to exercise with Stasia, because if I don't get enough exercise, I get real cranky, and that's not as good household harmony.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, all of it. Like, I love being outside. There was a while where my foot was injured where I couldn't run, and that was really hard for me on the physical activity front, because I do get really cooped up feeling, and I have all this like muscle energy that I can't spend, and that makes me crazy. But I did find that even just going outside and like looking at birds, I would feel a lot better. So it's not necessarily like, I don't necessarily have to be outside doing something extreme, So it's like, a combination of wanting to get the activity and also just time outside, I think, is healing for me.
Is your partner, is it James?
Yes.
Is he as outdoorsy as you are, or do you find that you need to go like kind of take these trips on your own because he's not as active?
I definitely do a lot of this on my own. He enjoys being outside, and like we go for hikes, and we went backpacking earlier this summer. But I think like he's also very focused on his own way of improving the world, which is, involvement in local politics and really trying to get like systemic change. And that's something I really admire and value about him. And I love that he does it, but it does mean that like he's much more entrenched in that world. And then I have all this time that I want to travel, and I just travel on my own and then come back. But we've had some really good adventures. Like actually a lot of my overseas adventures have been with him. Like we try every 3 years to go on a bigger adventure, like for the holidays. Like we'll spend 1 year in Portland and 1 year seeing our families, and then 1 year going somewhere
fun
that we've never been. So yeah, he's a good adventure buddy.
You've been together a long time?
I think this year is going to be 15 years.
Oh, wow.
Which is a long, long time.
And over that time, you've managed to kind of come to this acknowledgement or agreement that Stasia needs her time on her bike and she needs to get out. And he's, not that you need his permission, but he's cool with that. And and he no longer gets super worried about seeing you off for the weekend kind of thing. Because I can imagine it's like, oh, she's doing some big trip. I'm nervous. If it was my partner, I would be a little bit nervous about that.
Yeah, it's a very nice way of packaging it. And I wish it was that easy all the time. But But no, yeah, for the most part, I mean, my traveling has evolved as our relationship has evolved as well. So it's like, when we first got together, he bought me the first trailer that I took my first solo trip on, so he's seen me go from a little overnight to these like 3 or 4 week trips. And it's not easy, certainly, like I think he feels like I'm leaving him behind, and I miss him.
Yeah.
I'm sure he worries more than he lets on, but yeah, I think we've come to our agreement of sorts, I guess.
I get it. Yep. I totally understand. I have one of those here at home too. So I know.
Yeah.
Is there anything else? We've talked about a lot of really fun stuff here. And I think just kind of talking these things through, like I said, it really inspires me. One of the things that it's really subconscious. So it's not something that I give a lot of thought to, but I can tell that it influences me is that, when I go for a hike, we have to drive. Like we've got a couple of parks here in Seattle, and I'll go for runs in the parks to do a little bit of trail running. But if I really want to go do a trail run or I want to go for a big hike, I have to drive at least 40 minutes to an hour, to really get out. And there's this like resistance that I have to that. I'm like, I have to plan. It's like I have to plan that much more time. It's 2 hours of drive time. And, there's just a lot more planning involved in having to do that. And that's just me driving to a trailhead. But do you feel that resistance at all for yourself? Well, if I'm going to go for a hike, I've got a bike there. And, I'm probably not going to do that today because there's just that much more effort and organization that I have to put into it. Or that's like you said very early on, that's just part of it. Like that's part of the adventure.
I think it's a funny thing for me to talk about because I feel like since I've never owned a car, it's just normal. Like the amount of organization and planning that it takes to go somewhere is just what I do. Like if I'm going to bike somewhere, I'm going to think about what fits in my bag and, I don't know. So it's almost like I don't even think about it in that way at all. And I realize this for work because one of the interview questions was like, when I was applying for a WTA, they're like, you need to have your own personal vehicle. I was like, well, I don't have a vehicle, but I'm really good at thinking through logistics of like what needs to be where, when, and like what, how to like minimize the number of trips because I've always done that. So it doesn't really come up in that way. But actually, when you were asking that question, I thought of something last fall. I wanted to go see, there's a spot not so far from, maybe like 45 miles from my house that has like a really nice salmon run in the fall. And I wanted to go see the salmon run. I wanted to check it out, but I only had most of a day. Like I had an evening thing and I was like, okay, I'm literally, if I want to go out there, I'm signing myself up to bike at least 85 miles or 90 miles to go see these salmon, but I don't know if they're actually running yet. Like I just want to go check. And that's one where I thought long and hard about it. Cause I was like, do I actually want to bike 85 miles? And if I bike that far and there are no salmon, am I going to be sad?
So did you do it?
I did. Yeah, it was great. There were salmon, but even if there hadn't been salmon, it would have been a really nice bike ride.
And then you came back and you went to your event in the evening.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. I guess, there's things that I do that I have to plan for, but it reminds me of like, we don't have a microwave in our house. And, and like people are shocked, like, oh my God, what do you do?
Yeah.
How do you warm up a cup of, like, how do you heat a cup of hot water? I'm like, well, we use a tea kettle, that, that just takes a little bit longer. Or how do you defrost something? Well, you plan for it, it's just a different thing. So, and I imagine like when you kind of get into that rhythm that it's just part of the process. And I also imagine that you're not binge watching 8 episodes of 30 Rock at night. That's not taking up your time.
No. And neither is social media. So that's a big time suck for people too.
That's right. Yeah. Was there ever a time that you wanted to be on social media and you feel like, I miss out on like connecting with people?
I had a Facebook account for a while, like in college and out of college early on. But I decided it was not the way I wanted to spend my time, one, and that if I was going to be in touch with people, I would just be in touch with them. And I didn't need like a weird, data sucking proxy to be in touch with people. So yes, I am aware that I miss out on some things, like also because I don't have a smartphone. So I don't get group text or pictures on my phone, which is hilarious.
You have like a candy bar phone or something?
I have a flip phone.
Do you have like one of those razors? Like
It's
a
not
razor flip phone or
but
something?
yeah, you're thinking the right thing though. So I realized that, without being on certain platforms, like I don't see things, but I feel like that's actually kind of a mental health thing. Like I don't need to see everything. And I think that I've tried to craft my life in such a way that I see what is important to me, and then I can seek out news, and then I can like pursue the relationships that bring me joy and fulfillment, and that I don't get all the white noise of like other stuff that I don't need, but that feels like it's important at the time because it like flashes on your phone or whatever.
That's why you have time to write such nice, thoughtful emails. It's probably why you sound so happy in your emails. Yeah,
Possibly.
I absolutely don't doubt it at all. You've got time to craft that. Yeah, so mapping things is a whole nother thing. It's not like you're on all trails or, you're not mapping things. Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. I think your mom just got off Facebook too. I don't know if she told you about it.
She emailed me that she was going to, and I emailed back and I was like, that is a great decision. You know what? People are going to tell you that you're not going to be able to keep in touch with people, but I'm still in touch with all the people I want to be in touch with. You will be fine.
Right. Oh, good for her.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is there anything else that you want to touch upon today that we didn't cover? I know we didn't talk specifically about some of the big adventures that you've had, but I think people have a good idea of kind of how you craft things. I think that's the real key. Like maybe the specifics aren't quite as important, but the fact that you know your body, you know what you like, and you're getting out there and kind of and pursuing that and kind of following your own path, I think is the big takeaway.
Yeah, and I would just add baby steps. Like I think it's so important not to get hung up because something seems too big or because you don't have the right gear or something. Like just do what you can with what you can. And then, actually I'm really careful about what I purchase gear wise. And I'm always, always, always using what I have and like my stove right now is a stove that somebody gave me. And it's not like the lightest or the most ergonomic or the best stove, but it's what I have and it works. And I will probably not buy a different stove until this one dies. But some things like a one-person tent was actually really important to me because I wanted something that would pack up small and that was going to be light. So like I'm really intentional about buying stuff, and I try not to unless there's a really compelling reason. This is also with doing less harm. I'm pretty anti-consumer or anti-consumerism. So yeah, I would say use what you have, do what you can, and just be really intentional about it. Like you don't have to have everything that it seems like you need to have because other people have it, and
right, making thoughtful choices about the things that you do purchase. It's really important. I like to end these conversations by asking the guest, what does it mean to you to be bold?
What comes to mind is not caring how you come across to other people, which is maybe too simple because obviously we live in a society that matters a little bit how you come across and you don't want to cause harm to other people. But I don't know, not buying into the way you have to be, I guess, or the way that society tells you that you're supposed to recreate or you're supposed to act or things you're supposed to be afraid of. I guess like being bold is carving your own path and answering those things for yourself from your soul, not from something external to you. I don't think that made sense.
It actually makes perfect sense. And the thing is that when you're on social media so much, we're always looking for that feedback and acceptance. And I think not being on social media allows you more of a chance to get to know what your own values are without being influenced by other people. So I think there's a really big correlation between those two things, and I think, everybody knows we could all do with less social media. We could do with less news, with a lot less of many things. But yeah, it's hard habits to break. And, there is some good to all that as well. So I also like to ask, where can people find you? But not on social media.
On my blog mostly.
Yeah. And again, the blog is carfreerambles.org. And I'll link to that in the show notes. Is there any other place, or is that really kind of the main place?
That's kind of it. That's kind of the only consistent place.
Okay. No, that's totally fair. That's great. Stasia, thank goodness. Finally, we had an opportunity to... We did it. I know. It's great. And hopefully, like I said, when you're up in the Seattle area and you want to go for a hike, let me know. And, when things open up and I'm biking through Portland on my way to California.
Yeah.
Actually, I probably wouldn't come through Portland, but I would do the coast. I'd go out to I'd go out to the Olympic Peninsula.
I could meet you because I could bike out to the coast.
Where do you go? Like, do you go out toward Astoria or Cannon Beach area?
There's 3 really good ways to the coast. Astoria is one of my favorites just because the biking is really nice the whole time. And you can take like a rails trail for part of it. So it's all car-free. Super nice. So I like that one. But
how many miles is that?
That's almost 100 exactly from Hillsborough, not from Portland.
Ah.
So if I took like the max transit out to the end of the line, it's almost exactly 100 miles to Astoria.
Okay. Well, we'll figure something out at some point. We'll get together.
Yes. Oh, thanks for chatting.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
I know. Thanks again. Did that make you think out of the box about the types of adventures you could partake in? It certainly did for me. As you heard, I've been seriously considering a bike trip. And I mean, at least the seed is planted and that it's a possibility. And that's the important thing about hearing these conversations. You can find all episodes of the She's Bold podcast, as well as links to all the things we talked about at shesboldpodcast.com/episodes or wherever you find your favorite podcasts. To keep up with me, you can connect with me by friending me on Facebook, and I'm on Instagram at both Beth Whitwa, BETHWHITWA, and WanderGal. Feel free to leave a message or question at 877-280-5170. I so appreciate feedback. You can also email me at beth@shesboldpodcast.com. Ladies, you can join the Be Bold Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/BeBoldGroup for support and encouragement for whatever ways you're trying to be bold. Thanks for joining me for another episode of the She's Bold podcast. And until next time, be bold.